He never asked for much, never needed the spotlight, never cared for gifts on birthdays, or thank you speeches at the dinner table. He just showed up. Every day, every year, every season, fixed what was broken, stayed when things got hard, paid what needed to be paid with his time, his energy, his soul. But now, sitting in a quiet room, surrounded by everything he worked for, he asks himself the question he's never dared to say out loud. Where was everyone when I started to fall apart? He worked overtime when no one else would, stayed late, showed up early, took on the shift no one wanted, drove across town at midnight in the rain to fix a leaking roof for his sister. Not because she asked twice, but because he couldn't bear the thought of her sleeping under water dripping through the ceiling. He sat in silent waiting rooms while his loved ones got care. Hours passed. Coffee went cold. His back ached from the chair. But he stayed until the nurse came out to say, "You can go in now." And through all of it, no one ever asked if he needed the same care, if he had been sleeping enough, if he had been eating well, if he had been feeling okay, because that's not how the world sees a man like him. He provided not just money, he provided presence, advice, security, certainty. He was the anchor, the rock, the one everyone leaned on without ever wondering how much weight he was carrying, and he wore it all like armor. Because that's what men do, right? You stand tall. You don't flinch. You don't ask for help. You handle it. But armor is heavy. At first, it feels like protection. It blocks the wind, takes the hits, keeps you safe. But over time, it doesn't just protect, it isolates. You start to feel the separation, not just from danger, but from the connection. People stop asking if you're okay, because they assume the armor means you're fine. They talk to you, but not with you. They see the shield, not the man holding it. And here's the part no one tells you. When you've worn that armor long enough, you start to forget there's a human underneath it. You measure your worth by how much you can carry. You tell yourself you can't set it down, not even for a moment, because what if someone needs you? But deep down, you wonder, who would still come to you if you had nothing to offer but yourself? Not your money, not your advice, not your strength, just you. That question doesn't leave quickly. It follows you into the quiet moments. When you're driving alone at night, when you close the door after another long day, when you sit at the edge of the bed, shoes still on, wondering when it became your job to carry everyone else's load, and your own. Alone, because no one ever tells the man who never stops that even the strongest back will bend. If no one ever says, "Put it down, I've got you," and until you hear those words, you keep walking, armor on, heart hidden, still carrying it all. Because you don't know what life would look like if you stopped. He said no to the promotion, not because he wasn't capable, but because it would keep him on the road, away from home, away from the people he wanted to protect. He sold the motorcycle he'd spent years saving for, the one he used to polish on Sunday mornings, just to help pay for braces, because his child's smile mattered more than his own freedom on the open road. He quietly gave up dreams that were never even spoken out loud, trips he never took, hobbies he never started, goals he folded neatly and tucked away in a drawer, because someone else's needs always seemed to matter more in the moment. And here's the truth. He sacrificed, not because anyone demanded it, not because he was cornered, but because it felt right, because that's what love does to a man who's built to provide. It makes him give without keeping score. But what no one tells you is this. Even the strongest man eventually wants to be chosen back, not just needed, not just used, not just called when there's a problem to solve or a bill to pay. He wants to be seen for the man he is, for the quiet ways he shows up, for the small battles he fights alone, the ones no one applauds. Yet, the more he gave, the less people asked what he needed. They assumed he was fine, assumed he didn't have wants of his own, assumed that because he never complained, he must not have felt the cost. But he did. He felt it in the long nights when he couldn't sleep, in the mornings when his reflection looked a little older, a little more tired, in the ache of realizing the people he'd moved mountains for wouldn't cross a street for him. And it's not that they didn't care, it's that they never thought they had to. He'd built a reputation for being the one who didn't need help, the one who always had it handled, the one who never asked for anything in return. But here's the thing about silent sacrifices. They're invisible until they're gone. And by the time people notice, it's usually because the man who carried everything finally set it down. That's when they start to wonder, what happened to him? Why is he different now? Why doesn't he show up like he used to? But they never think to ask the harder question, how many years did he give before anyone thought to give back? He never kept score, never wrote it down, never pulled out a list in the middle of an argument to say, look what I've done for you, because he didn't give to win points. He gave because it was his nature, because when you love, you show it in action, not in words. But now that the house is quiet, now that the days pass without anyone needing him to fix, to solve, to carry, he remembers. He remembers every moment he showed up. While others didn't, he remembers sitting through her storms, holding his ground, keeping calm, taking every sharp word, every cold glance, and still showing up the next day to try again. But when his own silence came, when his own heart was heavy, when he sat at the edge of the bed, unable to find the words to explain the weight he was carrying, she walked away. He remembers staying loyal through seasons of distance, when love felt more like a formality than a fire, when the connection was paper thin, and yet he still believed it could be saved. But even then, he had to beg for a hand to hold, beg for a look that wasn't distracted, beg for a moment that felt real. He remembers holding everything together, schedule, bills, repairs, responsibilities, and still feeling like he was somehow not enough. That's the cruel paradox. You give until you're invisible, until people stop seeing the effort and only see the outcome. And when you finally stop, when you finally say, no, I can't this time, when you step back and put the weight down, they don't see the years you carried it. They only see the space where you used to be, and they wonder, why did he change? But the truth is he didn't change in that moment. He'd been changing all along. Every time he gave without being given back. Every time he stayed present for someone who couldn't do the same. Every time he swallowed his needs because he thought theirs mattered more. Those moments, they add up, not into resentment, but into clarity. And clarity is the kind of debt you can't pay back. Not with apologies, not with last-minute gratitude. Because once a man sees how one-sided it was, he can't unsee it. He doesn't keep score now, but he keeps his distance. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. Because the man who gave everything, and was still made to feel like it wasn't enough, learns that giving should never cost him himself. It wasn't loud. No shouting. No accusations. Just a moment. The kind you could miss if you weren't the one living it. He came home from work later than usual. Traffic had been a crawl. His back ached from hours on his feet. Hands are rough from the job. His heart was heavier from everything he couldn't say. He stepped inside, set down his keys. The smell of dinner hung in the air. The lights were on. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt alive. He sat at the table, looked around. No one asked how his day was. No one even looked up. Just the clinking of forks against plates, fingers scrolling across glowing screens, a television murmuring in the background, no one watching it. Silence. And in that silence, it hit him. I am a fixture in this house. Not a person. Not a soul. Just a function. He wasn't a man they were curious about anymore. He was the one who kept the lights on. The one who made sure there was food in the fridge. The one who paid the bills so they could scroll without worry. He smiled as usual, asked how their day was, got short answers, mumbled, "That's good," in return. But that night, something in him quietly shut down. Not in anger, not in a way anyone could see. It was quieter than that, like a switch being flipped in the dark, because it wasn't the first time he'd felt invisible, but it was the first time he realized he might stay that way forever if he didn't change something. That moment, it didn't break him in the way that ruins a man. It broke him in the way that frees him. Because once you see your place for what it truly is, once you feel the weight of being needed but never valued, once you taste the emptiness of giving without being known, you can't go back to pretending it's enough. And so, he sat there, finishing his meal, nodding at words that barely landed. All the while, a quiet resolve was forming in his chest. He didn't know what the next step would be. But he knew this. Whatever life he had left, it wouldn't be spent as a background character in his own home. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes, It's about the life you gave away, that no one even noticed was yours to give. He grieved the version of himself, the man who once believed love meant being everything for everyone, the one who thought his value was measured by his sacrifice, who stayed up late fixing what wasn't broken just so no one else had to worry. He grieved the moments he needed help, but swallowed the words before they could leave his lips, because he'd been taught real men don't ask for it. Real men stand, even when they're shaking. Real men keep walking, even when every step feels heavier than the last. He grieved the boy inside him, the boy who used to dream loudly, who once made lists of places he'd see, things he'd build, the kind of man he'd become. That boy's voice is quieter now. Not gone, but reduced to whispers on journal pages no one will ever read. And maybe the cruelest part? He didn't blame anyone else. He didn't rage at the people who took without giving, didn't resent the ones who leaned without ever lifting, didn't accuse the ones who looked at him and saw utility instead of humanity. He blamed himself for thinking it was safe to expect more, for believing that being needed was the same as being loved, for assuming that if he gave enough, he'd eventually be seen. And grief like that, it doesn't cry out, it doesn't demand to be heard, it just sits quietly inside a man, filling the empty spaces with the weight of what will never be returned. Some days it feels like a shadow always there, just behind him. Some days it feels like an anchor keeping him still when part of him wants to move forward. And some days it feels like a mirror, showing him a reflection that's both familiar and unrecognizable. That's the thing about this kind of grief. There's no funeral for the man you used to be. No eulogy. No gathering of friends who say, he was a good one. No closure. You just wake up one day, look at yourself in the mirror, and realize that man is gone, and you were the one who buried him. Under years of doing what was right for everyone but yourself, one evening, he stood in front of the mirror not to shave, not to check if his tie was straight, but to finally look, not at the skin, not at the lines on his face, but at the man underneath them. He stared long enough for the noise of the day to fade, long enough for the familiar mask to slip, and in that stillness, a question rose in his mind, one he'd never dared to ask. Who's been there for me, like I've been there for them? The answer came quickly, and it hurt in its simplicity. No one. Not because people were cruel, not because they didn't care in their own way, but because they'd gotten used to the idea that he never needed anything, that he was fine, that he'd always be fine. After all, he was the strong one, the steady one, the one who could be left alone with his own storms and still show up the next day like nothing happened. But strength like that, it's a dangerous disguise. It makes people forget you're human. And so, for the first time in years, he admitted the truth not out loud, but to himself. I need someone too. Not someone to fix him. Not someone to carry him. Not someone to make his life easier. Just someone to see him. To notice the days when his eyes are a little dimmer. To hear the things he doesn't say. To remind him he matters, even when he's not providing. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of honesty. Because a man can go decades convincing himself that being needed is enough. But when the silence settles, when the crowd thins, when all that's left is the sound of his own breathing in an empty room, he realizes something profound. What he's been craving all along wasn't gratitude, wasn't recognition. It was connection, not the kind that depends on his usefulness, but the kind that exists simply because he's him. That night, staring into the mirror, he didn't make promises. He didn't draft a plan. He just decided quietly, firmly, that the next chapter of his life would not be written by a man pretending he didn't need anyone. Because admitting you need to be seen isn't the end of strength. It's the start of it. If you're the man who's always paid the price, held the weight, stayed solid while others fell apart, let me tell you something no one ever said loud enough. You deserve rest. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve to be loved. Not for what you give, but simply because you're here. You've done enough. You've been enough. And now, it's time someone is there for you. Let that someone be you.